Hey, it's Chris Nichols here with PetaPixel. We're on the hot streets of Calgary today to play with the brand new Leica Q3. Q intro. So before we get into our initial look at the brand new Leica Q3, I just want to mention that Jordan and I recently for DP Review made a video about our dream cameras, the cameras that we would personally love to have, and we picked a few, but on both of our lists was the Leica Q2. He chose the standard version, I chose the monochrome, of course, and that's just because the Leica Q2 is such a well-loved, well-respected camera. Anybody who plays with it instantly falls in love with it. Now, I have to admit that I have since started seeing a new camera. The Leica M11 monochrome has now won over my heart, and I'm fully in love with that. But now that I got the Q3 in my hands, I don't know, temptation's calling. I might have to step out. I feel terrible, but this is a pretty sexy new camera. So I'm excited to get into a lot of the new features that the Q3 has, but before I do that, I want to mention this is an initial look. This is very much a pre-production camera and actually quite early firmware. So, we'll talk about the stuff we can talk about, but there's a lot of stuff I'm just not yet comfortable evaluating.
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Look, Jordan Fishies.
What are you talking about?
All young men with suits and ties, just sitting in the crowd smoking big cigars. I hope you're ready for what's coming now. I'm the one, I'm the lady that will bring it down.
So at the heart of the Leica Q3, we have the 60 megapixel sensor, which we expected. I mean, it's a sensor that you find in the Leica M11, and it's a sensor which we think is made by those guys up there. Now, this does give us a lot of detail. I mean, I like having 60 megapixels, but I also want to talk about the lens that's on the front of this camera. So when we first played with the Leica Q, we were just blown away by the value that the 28mm f1.7 added to that whole package. Then when we played with the Q2, we said, oh, this is exactly the same lens, but it's working great on a 45 megapixel sensor. And now that we have the Q3, we're saying, oh, this is the exact same lens, but now it's doing a great job with the 60 megapixel sensor. So this lens just keeps giving and giving. Just as a recap, first off, best thing about it, it's not a 35mm focal length. I love that. 28, perfect for the streets here. Gives you lots of coverage when you want to tell the story. But also, it's just built incredibly well. I mean, starting with the aperture ring, we do have an auto selection, but it's very nice. It's got good positive click stops. The manual focus for a focus-by-wire lens is just one of the smoothest you'll find. Really smooth, really well dampened. Feels like you're using a classic manual focus Leica lens. But again, when you get to the end, you can very easily, with just a click of a button, click it into autofocus and click it out again. It even has one of these classic little grips on here so you can turn it with one finger. Just beautiful. Now, image quality is another one of those things I really want to wait to see what the production camera will give us, but at the same time, there shouldn't be any surprises here. We've seen this sensor in the Leica M11, it does a great job. We've seen this lens before, it's very sharp, and so I'm expecting the image quality to be fantastic here. I do also want to mention that I have one of my buttons set here to crop in, so I can go from 28 down to 35, or to 50, or to 75. Now that we have the 60 megapixel option, that's even more viable because we've got so many megapixels to start with. Now, when it comes to displays on the Leica Q3, you've got a big upgrade here. First off, 5.76 million EVF, that's a nice jump up, lots of detail, but also it refreshes at 120 frames per second. So if I'm shooting like on the street, action, movement, that kind of stuff, I don't feel like there's any lag holding me back. It's really nice. The back panel, though, is also been upgraded in a big way. Now up to 1.84 million dots. It's very clear. I'm finding it quite easy to see, even on a bright sunny day like this. But most importantly, we do now have a tilt function there. It is only on one axis, but this is fantastic for a street camera like this when you want to maybe get shots from the hip and stuff, or low to the ground stuff. So overall, that's a really nice upgrade. Now, I want to mention one thing that I've noticed about the EVF, and I want to preface this by saying, again, this is a pre-production camera. We might very well see this get corrected when we have final firmware and a final camera. But when I'm in continuous autofocus in particular, using the EVF, I notice that the resolution does drop while the camera's focusing. I've seen this on other cameras. I've seen this on a few of the Sony cameras as well. And time will tell if this is going to actually go away or not, but it can be a little bit distracting. This is something I'm absolutely looking for when I have a production like a Q3 to see if they've changed that. So many upgrades on this camera to talk about. Let's talk about another big one, and this is really one where this new L2 partnership between Panasonic and Leica has come to fruition. The Leica Q3 now has phase detect autofocus. However, this is one of the things where there are still some issues. I'm just not comfortable really evaluating it fully, but I will say this. This now has subject detection for people as well as animals, and I am seeing it pick up people's faces, pick up their torsos. Seems to be pretty effective. Also, the tracking autofocus, never would have used it on the Q2. We would just use AFS, move our focusing point over. I mean, that was it, because continuous autofocus just wasn't reliable. Here, the tracking seems to be quite sticky. So overall, I think the implementation, although very simple, seems to be very effective, and I'm excited to see how well it works when I have a production unit. Now, the Leica Q3 has both a mechanical and electronic shutter, and I will say with the 60 megapixel sensor, you're gonna get some rolling shutter when you use the electronic shutter. It's a little rough. I mean, if I'm panning the camera horizontally, or if something moves through the frame horizontally rapidly, it's gonna go diagonal. It doesn't look great, so I would try not to use it. However, there are some benefits to going to electronic shutter, and that comes largely into the burst rates on this camera. Now, this does have the potential to shoot quickly, but it really depends. So, if I'm in mechanical shutter mode and I want to have continuous autofocus enabled, 14-bit RAW, I'm looking at 4 frames per second. I can go up to 7 frames per second at 14-bit, but I'm not going to get autofocus. If I'm in mechanical shutter, I can go up to 9 frames per second as my maximum, but no autofocus, and now it drops down to 12-bit RAW files. Now, if I go to electronic shutter mode and I really need it, now I can go up to 15 frames per second. Again, 12-bit files, no continuous autofocus. So you have the potential to shoot quickly, but for the most part, I'm probably going to keep this at 4 frames per second. Now, everything that we love about the Q2 is still here in the Q3, and that's great. They really didn't mess with anything that was already working. So I love the custom buttons here, you know, one on the control dial, a couple on the back, and in traditional Leica fashion, I can just hold one down for a few seconds, then it brings up a menu, and I can choose pretty much anything I want to customize. The body is the same, which is great, because that grip is fantastic. I feel like the leatherette gives me nice purchase on the front, and that very simple thumb indent still works. I don't feel like I'm going to drop the camera. Now, very similar to the Q2, we now have some weather sealing. So this is IP52 rated. I do feel like I'd be comfortable carrying this around in dusty or light rain conditions. We do have some changes here. So first off, no built-in memory, and that's interesting because we're seeing that a lot in, you know, the M11, now the M11 monochrome. And I was hoping to have the built-in memory here. Instead, we just have one single SD card slot. We do also have a brand new battery type. Battery life seems quite acceptable, but again, I want to wait till I have a full production to really test that. But everything very simple, very straightforward. We now also do have, for the first time, an HDMI port here on the side, and that's because this camera does have some video capabilities now. We should talk about that next.
Jordan here to talk about the video capabilities of the Q3, which are actually weirdly impressive. This thing can shoot 8K, it has ProRes recording, but there are some interesting caveats with it. For starters, both the 4K and 8K are cropping in. To get the full width of the sensor, you're going to have to record 1080p, which is also oddly the only mode that you can record in ProRes. Seems kind of interesting. What I'm really looking forward to testing when we get a full production version of this is how the autofocus performs with this having phase detect autofocus. You'll have to stay tuned for that, but I do want to get across, even though this has log, 8K recording, really good video specs, there's no microphone jack in it, so it's probably never going to be your primary video camera. You will be able to capture some beautiful footage with that though, and we'll talk about it more in our full review.
So even though this camera is so pre-production, everything that I love about the Q2 is here, and then the upgrades that we're getting are really big upgrades. You know, so all it really makes me want to do is absolutely get my hands on a production unit to really test it out. But I have a feeling that whatever it is that people love about the Q series, they're going to love even more on the Q3. Leave your comments below, let us know what you think, let us know what you'd like to really see us test when we do get a production unit. Leave your comments, we'd love to see that. Instagram, Twitter, please follow us there as well. Follow the channel, subscribe right now if you haven't already, click that notification bell, we always appreciate that. But we will see you shortly with more episodes, including eventually a full review of the Leica Q3.
Joint on a corner where the big boys play.